and yeah.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on our first BRC session of 2025 or 26 for the fall. Sorry. So we hope that you had a really nice summer and break and that you are energized to start. So let me introduce you our first speaker, which is Stanley Li. Hello, Stanley. Thank you for joining us today. Stanley
Pleasure
Li
is
is the
mine.
found. Thank you. Stanley Li is the founder and CEO of Netswitch and Securli, which is a cybersecurity risk governance organization. It develops ransom block and SARA IPAS, which is integrated platform as a service for small and mid-sized companies to manage cyber risk in alignment with governance risk and compliance requirements. So Stanley has a very broad IT career. He began as a technician and evolved through progressive leadership roles, including supervisor, project manager, sales engineer, and network consultant with a bachelor degrees in finance and real estate. Impressive, and a master's degree in telecommunications management. After the true digital transformation from the analog to digital world, and completed all the challenges related to the Y2K bug. I remember that. They were talking about that in 2000. He founded NetSwitch, which we already 25 years. Impressive. Launching an entrepreneurial journey that expanded globally across the Asia Pacific region with operations in Thailand, Hong Kong, and China from 2004 to 2020. That's right. During the pandemic, he secured a patent in 2020 and it was granted in 2023 while maintaining active community involvement as a mentorship program board advisor at San Francisco State University's College of Business and startups mentor at Hong Kong's Cyberport, served as a chairperson of a sister cities commission for the city of Richmond, California, and most recently invited to become a member of the IT Employer Advisory Committee for the city of Oakland, California. Impressive, Stanley. Thank you so much for being here and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure is mine. As I said, I'm here to learn. I'm not here to teach, first of all. I'm just here to share my insights. And we know, thank you, Marcella, and thank you, Award, for inviting me. And Award, you and I have gone back and forth for several years already. So this is a subject that we knew when we start embarking on this journey is going to be something bigger than what I have learned, what I have done in the past. And so I have been in particularly cybersecurity for 20 years. And starting point is go back into vulnerability assessment as a service because there is no software. Then fast forward 20 years later during the COVID time, as I said, I was talking to Marcella and Award, what am I going to do with the rest of my time now that I'm stuck here and I can't travel like all of us. So at that point, this is where that I looking at, well, how can I share back what I have learned and try to build the community that basically training the future practitioner. That's why I'm here to ask for your help. I presenting my material, asking for your help and hoping that we can build this community. And of course, part of the journey that I work with Callaghan Mellon and Cheryl Root, she came from the background in marketing with the tech companies in Silicon Valley. So one thing that we did define is the 5C model is communication, collaboration, customization, customer, and community. So customer and community oriented, this is what we are trying to drive. Now, the communication, when we're starting to build this cyber risk governance system, one part we talk about, there's too much acronyms in our space between technologists, compliance, risk management, and of course, business executive. And it comes down to the business executive, all they understand is, all they wanted to understand is ROI. So how can we translate, I should say, and transform the system data into now, of course, we cannot go without talking about AI, but what we referring is the AI square, the artificial intelligence as well as augmented intelligence, and producing the global resilience index. So for organization, they can measure themselves against how well they're doing in the resilience maturity at any given time. So this is something that we try to encourage all of you to help me to participate with your local community college, university, research institute. How can we do that in what we refer as the 4 levels of compliance: global, regional, local, and industrial? So these are the things that we want to put it out there. And now that I'm done selling, which is try to help get you guys to involve into building this community, it, and then jump back into why I talk about the cyber securities inaction, the cycle of inaction. So this is where that during the last 20 some odd years, and you probably heard most of the time, company just check the box rather than doing the right thing. And it still continue to be so after 20 some odd years. When I started in the field, it wasn't called cybersecurity. It was just called network management. As it evolved so many years, that now has been, many different terms had take place: network management, network security, now cybersecurity. Now we're evolving into cyber risk management, and what we talk about cyber risk governance. And the challenge still remains is, according to Oxford University, 72% of the CEO is unsure. They don't know how to make decisions about cybersecurity because it's a technical component. They understand risk. They know how to manage. They wanted to manage the cyber risk, but then technical side of it, it becomes what we refer as a cybersecurity black hole. They keep on investing money into it, and as we see, this is the incidents it comes out from technical into risk. Cybersecurity incidents happens all the time. We heard it all over the news every day. And now it's more into a $10.5 trillion into the cyber loss. So this is some crazy amount of figures that if you ask Google or ask AI, you'll find things related to it. The closest one that we found in the McKinsey report is 1.5 to $2 trillion in the loss. But we hardly talk about this. How does it relate it to the small mid-sized businesses? Now, this is the reactive type of, even passive reactive type of strategy that they've been engaging. Even though they have some type of money, they scramble, try to train people to, check the box for the auditors, or until the next incident happens, or when they get hacked, then the real problem starts, because now, not many SMBs were able to have 220,000 to justify for the cyber attack, and some of them will eventually go out of business because of this type of attack. What I see that you have your okay. No,
Sorry, I just basically because Stephen was asking about repeat the 5 Cs and Marcella wrote them back.
Okay. Yeah.
But I'm
Customers and
missing one.
community. Yeah, community. So communication, customization. Sorry, community. Sorry, communications, collaboration, customization, customer, and community. The 5 Cs. So we start with about a lot to do what we're doing is the communications. Then what I did earlier, ask you to join the community, is how do we collaborate? This is an ongoing collaboration between different groups of professionals or educators as a mentor that I'm participating. How do we train, how to change the verbiage, how to change the culture as part of the collaboration. Then customization is really focusing on, well, how does that one company or the organization want to adapt cyber risk management rather than just cybersecurity as a technical term? And then customers is really internal, external customers, that how they interact with what they are doing as an organization to interact with internal and external customers. And internal customers simply refer as the training program on the last slide we're talking about. But do you do that, proactively, or do you do that reactively? And most of you probably are consultants or high-level executive within an organization. Do you take these type of system data and just looking at is the spreadsheet and then check the box? Or do you try to make the contextual correlations and prioritize that based on your company's focus? And as you know, is the risk tolerance level, is the risk appetite, which needs to be, I'll talk a little bit more about it in the next couple of slides. And then come back into the community. As I said, this is something that is so huge. And as I asked earlier, what is the cyber resilient index? Well, the resilient index is really when we putting resources into addressing a subcontrol. That's from our cyber risk governance perspective. We look at the subcontrol, we put that into open source, and which is available for testing at this point, is an alpha test. But at that point, what is it? How do you combine with the augmented intelligence? This is where your expertise comes in, guiding the upper management, guiding the people below. Well, what is our priority? How does it relate it to the risk that you identify? And part of it, what we're sharing to the community is the business impact analysis. We didn't put it, up together by ourselves. We work with several professionals, has been in the field for a long time, aggregated it and put it as a playbook and workbook that we're sharing with future practitioner to learn. If they wanted to have a degree in cybersecurity, we ask them to look at that also, how to do they start the communications and risk management. So that's kind of the 5C model that we worked on. Thank you for asking. So another chance for me to sell, to sell our concept. So now back into this slide that we talked about. This is the McKinsey report, something that you look at. It's like we spend trillions in dollars and just last in the 20 years. But one thing that I find out when I talk to the cyber insurance company, which a lot with you might be involved into risk management, right? So this is the part that we said, well, ask them in 2019, those big major underwriters. I asked them, how do you underwrite cybersecurity policies? Knowing at the back of my mind when I ask the questions, they don't actively or even try to be adaptively to check on those policy holders. What is their risk after they issue the policy premium, after they got the policy being issued? So the rest of the 11 months or the rest of the 12 months, they have no idea how that operation is being functioning. Unlike in other financial industry, you got Moody, you got Standard and Poor's, and AM Best in the insurance. These type of index that is constantly changing and adapting into the environment. So as an insurance company, so they can adjust their risk accordingly, not in cybersecurity. And in fact, let me prove my point. I have been a managed service provider, managed security service provider. Prior to 2020, when our customers sign up with us, we actually give them a $250,000 insurance policy for free because it was so cheap that we said, well, we give it to you if you do business with us. Up until SolarWinds, we heard that case being hacked in 2020. 18,000, if not more, being affected. This was just one of the figure that we find. 18,000 organizations being affected because of one company is hacked. In 2021, what I refer the whole insurance company take a different turn, 180-degree turns. Now, if you don't start putting out any of their underwriting processes, checking the vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, we don't even consider you writing a policy for you unless the amount is so crazily high. But still, it does not address my question. How do you constantly knowing your risk as an insurance company? Still doesn't have any clue up now 5 years later. So this is the part that, yes, is part of our ask is try to build this community, global resilient index to benefit everyone. This is where you come in involved as a risk professional. So we know that there are different ways to measure Bayesian, Monte Carlo analysis, fair models, all of these models, nothing wrong with them. We don't call them, I'm not a risk professional. This is where you come in. This is what we part of refer always talked about the top-down perspective. How does the management looking at risk and how do they define it? This is where you come in and help them to define the corporate culture in the risk management perspective and define that narratives so they can start acting. The entire company can start focusing on what they deem to be the priorities in risk management. Now, coming from the bottom up perspective, this is where I live. In the last 20, 30 years, if you including my cable pulling experience from the ground up, literally from the ground up. So this is where I call it, the bottom up kind of industrial floor. We still looking at a cybersecurity, looking at the CVSS score. So I mentioned all the other fair model, the Bayesians and the Monte Carlo type of evaluation process has nothing to do with managing cybersecurity. Wow, after all these years, we're still using CVSS, which has no business context, as I mentioned from the top-down perspective, has no considerations on it. Most of the companies still relying on that to measure on a daily basis to look at the severity level, how the CVE might potentially impact the cybersecurity's integrity, but has no business context, no context in supply chain, and which we know has been a big problem since 2003 when the Target, the retail Target store has been hacked by via the HVAC company into Target and lost 15 million record. Has not been changed in the fundamental of how we evaluate severity level that applicable based on the business objective. So, of course, I know there are movements, there are companies already like RSA Archer, metric streams and bit sites and vendors and moving towards that direction, but none of them are applicable into SMB environment. All of those tools probably require a full-time person just to manage the tool itself. I have been in that route. A lot of what I call the Rolls-Royce tools, you know what, you got to hire a team of experts just to manage that tool. So how can SMB afford that, into that journey? So this is why that we asking the community to help. How can we leverage open source with university, with grants that we are applying, into NSF in like what is talking about, the brother countries in United States, we ask NSF, we apply with NSF with university to apply for the grant to try to change that landscape and make it more accessible for the SMBs. And because they are part of the supply chain risk, if you look at it, all the small businesses that they have supplying into big companies, mid-sized company, but they have almost zero expertise in that area. All they do is just continue to check the box, buying the different fragmented tool, and then hoping that they won't get hacked. Because I share a lot of experience with that group, and they might not even know where their vulnerability comes in. They have no idea because they don't manage risk. They might not be compliance, professionals. They might not even be a technical professionals. So now they either relying on some third party, which we've seen a lot of vendors in the IT, our peer come in and just say, well, you should buy this, you should buy that. No worry, that will take care of your cybersecurity. And that is where I go back into what I said earlier about the acronym battle. So we need to help to translate all this information interpret it into the right way, and support their effort. And this is where the university like SUNY Albany, U Albany, that they building their cybersecurity clinics for the small businesses in the local area. They can help them when they have questions or they got hacked. And this is where the students come back and providing the services as a capstone project to support that initiative. Now, everything that we talked about, of course, is a lot to do with the operational side of it and the cost side of it. But again, going back into this is a systematic risk that we as a community, as a global community, have put a huge burden into our economic impact. And this is where that I do a lot of research looking into the World Economic Forum. And one part of it is cyber inequity, which is talking about the basic knowledge, basic awareness of cybersecurity. And in fact, most part of the world still don't have that in that SMB environment. This is why we built the open source. Part of it is we break it down into the 6 different pillars of cybersecurity. But I'm not here to talk about ourselves, so I'm going to move on to the next slide. This is go back into the educations, the communications, collaborations, then jump into the community. How do we build the foundations? How do we integrate with all the open source tools? How do we optimize using AI for focusing on security automation? And when Marcella introduces one part of our product, we call it SARA, which is SARA, Security Automation and Risk Assessment. And this is the part that, again, I'm not a risk expert, but I know there's a lot of things in the technical side that people should manage that risk as a third-party supply chain a lot tighter. I mentioned about some of our peers, some of the people that say, I don't care, I just want to sell the solution, check the box for the customers, I'm going to move on to the next customers. So this is the part that we kind of come back, you as a risk professional needs to look at, well, how do we validate, even though when it's supposed to be optimizing the performance of the operations, streamlining with automations, then we need to continue to look at it and validate it so we can evolve from that point into the next level, the higher up level of cyber resilience maturity. Well, how do you know you're putting the right effort? How do we know, as I said, as a team, putting the right effort into it? Because a lot to do with the business executive, how they determine risk. What is their risk? How do they prioritize that? What does that do related to their daily operations if they can get to that point? So it's just like a big funnel. How can they continue to do that into the part where they want to emphasize it? Maybe it's just a 3 months effort, maybe a year effort. Nevertheless, this is where it needs to, again, go back into what we refer as the centralized dashboard, data visualizations, so they can start, everybody within the organization can share this centralized dashboard. Well, it's right now a lot of enterprise grade solutions is prohibiting because everyone has to buy a license, even whatever level. That's what they are here for. They want to sell licenses. So we want to, break that traditional mentality. There are lots of open source. There are a lot of experts willing to contribute into the open source community. And in fact, in EU itself is already driving all the agencies under EU to use as much as open source as possible. And again, because right now, a lot of enterprise like Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, they are more predominantly as a US company driving all of these technology, which basically make it cost prohibiting for the SMB. So this is when you're looking at this chart, top down, bottom up, operational effectiveness. Cost efficiency is one part of it. But more importantly, on the entire strategy, what we call this adaptive strategy, is to drive the cognizant, at least it drive the cognizant level. In our first vision is called elevate cognizance, which is awareness and knowledge. Well, at least that in that perspective, the staff within the SMB environment, they would be more aware of what is cybersecurity. Rather than looking at it as a noun, it should be like a verb. It continue to change based on the contextual correlations coming from the educational perspective. Now, also at the same time, on the bottom axle, what we call the compliance evidence. And this is where I go back into the first statement I made. How do we transform system data by using the AI square, augmented and artificial and augmented intelligence, into building this global resilient index? It's by looking at the data analytics side. These are the data that being collected with those tools and interpreted in the top-down perspective from the risk tolerance level perspective. Then they would have this evidence being done and continue to track and able to produce this type of report when they get hacked, let's just say tomorrow, and telling the, in our part, the state attorney generals that they will come back and knock on their door, hey, you got hacked, give me the evidence. Depends on the industry. We know that in the financial industry, in the banking industry, they only have got 96 hours, if I remember correctly, to produce this type of report. Well, at this point in time, everybody's still scrambling. Like an earlier slide I talked about, oh, we got to get those evidence. Who am I going to hire to get the forensic part of it going? Let's get those evidence. No, this is the wrong type of culture. We should go back into collecting this evidence as we go. So when we got hacked, we already have those data. Yes, it might not be completely ready, but at least, thank you, Stephen, for the GRC reference, right? So these are the objective. We put them onto open source, and please reach out to me, and I'll show you about what we have done together on the open source solution in future time. But I want to tie it back into the 5 C's. And
Stanley,
yes, go
sorry,
ahead.
can you
No,
go back to the previous slide?
okay.
I raised my hand on so that we have some interaction. We have with us what I joke about. First, two IT gurus in my dictionary. That's Steve, as well as, of course, Peter. He loves to play with IT and technology and everything else. As well, we have with us also, from a board of director perspective, is Steve Van Mallory. So looking at this, does it ring with their work? I know that Stephen from Houston, from Texas, said it's good reference to GRC. But my question is, does this sort of what we are going to get, or we are still in the baby process?
Let me read off what Peter has said written on the chat, if you haven't got a chance to look at it. And by the way, I want to say that thank you, Peter. It means a lot to me. I'm not a risk expert, so I'm more focused on the technology side, how to integrate. But let me read off what Peter had said to you. Stanley, great insights. This ties in beautifully with the importance of third-party risk, the potential negative impact on an organization that stems from its reliance on an external vendor, supplier, or partners for goods, services, or data. That's Peter's comment. And then Stephen's comment is, Peter, so completely agree.
Okay.
What does that give you the answer?
Yeah, it gives me the answer, but just teasingly, I would like to hear from Peter with all his playing with the toys.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
Yeah.
There we go. There we go. Thanks, Stanley. Really enjoying this. Yeah, completely agree with what you're talking about. Again, it is a maturity thing. Because some people are here, some people are here, most are here. So completely agree with what you're saying. It's just that awareness, making sure people realize that.
thank you. From a board of director perspective, Stephen, what do you think? Where are companies? You sit on many boards.
Well, I think it's absolutely an imperative set of observations that you brought. And I think you're bang on. It's all about education and it's all about avoiding this scramble, as you say, when an incident occurs. And it's about prioritization. So I think the more the education, the better, the more that open source can be used to define a narrative, and the more that we can start to create opportunities for small and mid-sized businesses, I totally agree. But I think from a board standpoint, um, a default right now is let's get an outside expert to opine and provide us with solutions because many entities don't have in-house people that are qualified to do the kind of work you're doing. So I totally agree with this. It's all about education. That's kind of what I'm all about in terms of trying to educate boards on risk prioritization. And this is always at the top of every risk register, every list of risks. So Awad, I hope that answers your question. I think we need more of this, more education in board speak. So it's very simple and it's very easy to understand. And it points to some of these deficiencies that are being identified in this great webinar. So more education, the better. It's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Also, Stanley, if I interjected, but I thought it just to stimulate some discussion. Back to
Oh,
you.
I love interactions. In fact, when you asked me to speak for 45 minutes by myself, I panic on that too. So because this is exactly why we wanted to continue to educate, if you may, into the different aspect. And thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Pete. That means a lot to me because, from the expertise perspective, well, how do we work together 5Cs? How do we change the narrative? And these are the part that when I started off this, kind of giving this webcast and discussions, people ignore me. And I remember in 2023, I was one of the panelists at the QS.com, which is they measure different universities' ratings and things like that. And they invited me to talk about data risk in the Education Summit. So one part of it, I challenged the universities and I said, look, you know what? You have a lot of historical data. Why can't you just share it? And then so we can basically continue to work with AI and work with whatever tools that each of the organizations want to adapt, our model called cyber risk governance and continue to work with it. Nobody wants to touch it. Nobody wants to talk about it. Yes, I understand in one side is the data privacy. On the other side, if we don't change this narrative, our economy continue to get impact on a yearly, daily basis. And these basically affecting everybody in our life because we know that if our supply chains got impacted, we know the cost is going to go up. So this is very fundamental economic 101. But how can we do that in a group together? And these, Stephen, you talked to the board of directors. Board of directors don't want to learn anything about technical data. They don't want to learn anything about technology. They focus on what is my growth, what is my company's ROI. And this is the part that you look at on the slide that we put in together, the defense in depth overview. We break it down into the 6 pillars. This is our definitions. No, by this, this needs to be customized for the organization. This is where the augmented intelligence comes in. And then how can we utilizing LLM to speed up the process? This is our continued explorations into these sectors, but we don't believe ever LLM going to take over what we do in risk management or any type of management. It needs to have the human interjections, the expertise, interpretations into guiding the company to continue to have this communications, because company change, the world changes. So on a daily basis, this continue to be focusing on the adaptive approach, adaptive strategy. And for the board, yes, they might look at the heat map and look at the percentage, but then they can always come back and change the priority. So this is the future step. So, going back into how do we change the narrative? And these are the 5 C's that we talk about. What we started doing and put together the white paper. Well, how do we change from a strategic point of view? How do you go from a passive to adaptive? And then how do we integrating this type of top-down, bottom-up approach? Again, I'm not here to, to educate. These are just the approaches. And that's why we said it's an inspiration leadership model. We need to have the leadership come back, refine the model based on the organization, what they need, not what the industry needs or what not the software needs. This is where we're looking at into frameworks and benchmarks. So from a technologist point of view, when I starting to write this patent called Cyber Risk Governance Systems, we look at NIST because it just was born in that year. And the big title that it attracts me is Integrating Cybersecurity and Enterprise Risk Management. Wonderful, but this is more of a communication framework and collaborations. And it break it down into which in the next slide, I'm going to talk more about it. But then we look at it, well, that's just a communication framework. How can we put, again, we don't want to come back and say, oh, Netswitch or Securli did this, you should believe in us. We should be looking at a more holistic and most importantly is unbiased approach. So that is why we adapted our technology solutions with the CIS, which stands for Center for Internet Security. They put together a lot of mapping controls. They looking at from a very, rudimentary level. How do you build a computer or a laptop based on a Windows OS, based on an Apple OS, or based on Google Chrome OS? From that very bottom perspective. And when we look at it, it's like, great, somebody has already done a lot of work and they have been, again, 25 years too. This is perfect. This is where we think that from a technology benchmarking perspective, we don't have to say, don't, trust me. I hate that word, right? Lots of vendors say, oh, trust me, we can do that for you. I believe in trust and verify. This is a way to verifying coming from the bottom-up perspective, is IT doing the right thing according to CIS benchmark? Yes, you might able to plug in some other benchmark to measure the technical components of it. And by CIS benchmark, they have done a lot of it already. And if you look at, you can download those controls mapping. They defined it in their own categories, 18 categories and controls. And okay, so I got to go in a little bit about the network and technology side. This is where we're using natural language process and letting the NLP to do its work and providing the contextual correlations. Then we can feed it into the LLM to do its work to continue to, build the code or build the, refine the process. Basic produce white paper framework, subcontrols on the correlations. Back then, of course, we have to use spreadsheets. And now I was able to do that with AI within hours, within days, depends on how complex. And I translated from the Hong Kong's latest protection of critical infrastructure framework, mapping that into the CIS benchmark and mapping it into the product. I was able to do that within hours. Now, of course, we still need to be vetting. This is where the augmented intelligence comes in and spend the time to vet it out and to make sure it's accurate. And then we'll put that back into the open source, what we call the data visualization tools. So now all the organization member can come back and contribute their comments, and we can take that into a different, what we refer as the customization at that point. To avoid the vendor-centric algorithm, this is an important part from the technologist perspective. And I'm sure that you heard of this company called Splunk. And I think that it's being sold to Cisco. But most of the people might not remember when they start Splunk, it was an open source network monitoring tool. They took the timing, converted into one of the Rolls Royce of SIEM solution. Fantastic. But then I couldn't even understand how to operate at that point because it was so complex that I have to go take a degree from Splunk to understand. Well, you can argue it is a complex subject. It is very challenging subject. Yes, I agree. But at the same time, this is where that the organization spending the money, training the staff into a particular product. And unfortunately, I have to, again, using my old age and experience, come back. I used to work for Nortel. Most of you would know Northern Telecom. This is where that when Marcella introduced me, this was my digital transformation, going from the analog world into digitization. I was so happy working for Nortel, but unfortunately, we know what happened to that company. So less dependent on a vendor or a platform, the better we would in managing resilience, managing risk. And this is where that go back into the last slide. Well, we cannot just keep on hiring and training people on these fancy tools, Rolls-Royce type of tools, without talking about customization, without talking about the reliance, what the potential impact with that reliance. So this is why we're focusing on open source integration, community-driven, work together with your research institute, your universities, elevate connaissance, and focus back into the NIST 286, where three parts of it, we focusing on the risk register as just aggregating the data into compliance evidence, risk evidence, and risk profile. This is the data analytic comes in, but it has to be working with the experts into customizations. And then we leave that risk quantifications to expert like yourself, because we don't know anything into the risk tolerance level, risk modeling, like I said before. We just want to present this data from an unbiased, holistic, and unbiased approach, and let you continue to take that into quantifications and determine what the board needs from the top down, the upper management needs, and continue to drive the prioritizations into evidence. I touched on the NIST 8286 framework, where I borrowed the risk register and then risk profile. This is where how they breaks it down into the 5 special publications. But interesting part of it, when looking at reading from, 82, 86, then A, B, C, D, this is the interesting part I find. Why did they put D, business impact analysis, for risk prioritization on the bottom of it? I have no clue. But this is where we're starting from. We said we should be sharing the business impact analysis playbook and workbook to the public, to educate the future practitioner or the existing practitioner. This is how we start the communication, correcting our communications, rather than relying on industrial flaws like CVSS to determine the severity level. We should look at it from a customization perspective. Whether how does the organization focusing on internal or external customers as the priority, and then redefine the communication and collaboration on a constant basis. While constant is a different term, depends on the company's organizations. Some board might meet every quarter, some board might meet every 6 months, some board just meet annually. So this is going back into the customization. But borrowing the NIST 8286 framework to communicate how do we put this foundational framework to integrating cybersecurity. That's the $1 trillion that if it has been resolved, we wouldn't have this problem anymore. And that is part of the industrial flaw that I'm pointing out, because the communication is not there. Nobody really talk about it from the top down. Well, I wouldn't say nobody. I'm just saying that based on my experience, a lot of people just look at it from a silo perspective. Communications being fragmented, even within the IT department, and what they worry about, well, how can I keep my job for tomorrow or for next month? Rather than looking from a top-down perspective, how can we protect the organization so I can have my job? And this is the part that I got to train the future practitioner. Even talking about the industrial language, I was able to convert from a chef into a cybersecurity analyst just by changing the narrative. So as simple as that. That's why I'm encouraging our community to look at this as a framework, and then you can define your framework, your model, but how can we collaborate as a community? And starting off with this business impact analysis. This is another part. I welcome you to, let me know, join our cyber risk governance community in LinkedIn, and also let me know, if you can help with the business impact analysis, focusing on your maybe local, regional, industrial, definitely in your expertise in that area. And if you're working in the global organization, we welcome you to do that as well. This is where that we take this type of recommendations and turn it into capstone projects for my mentees and my interns, and ask them to, based on their pace, based on their style, based on their capacity, to continue to enhance it. And then one part that being done is by Rome Business School in Italy. These are master degree students that we basically analyzing using CRG, cyber risk governance as a framework. How do we evaluate AI Act? How does Netswitch get into, Italy and Germany? That was the final report that I was very happy to have that report done. It was just through a collaboration between an intern and a company that we want to turn this into a community project. And they have come back with an, excellent report that they have done for us. And again, this is just using business impact analysis to develop this type of capstone project. And hopefully that we can help to the small and non-profit organizations. And in fact, UC Berkeley and City of San Francisco has done an extensive research about the nonprofits organization within the City of San Francisco. And it's called CyberCan, Cyber CAN. I forgot what the acronym stands for, but this was done last year, was finalized by last year. Of course, we know those nonprofits are under-resourced. And this is the part that how can we elevate connaissance? How can we guide them via this capstone project as a community to drive this type of change of narrative? And of course, our goal is to define this type of KPI, KRI, and some people calling it KCI now. Again, so all this acronym battle. We just want to boil everything into system data, put it into the risk register. So at least coming from a data visualization perspective, is start prioritizing for the organizations. Something that should have been as easy as 1, 2, 3 steps. So this is where the customizations that we believe that we should turn it into some type of capstone project. One thing that we look at is the technology readiness level. So this is the part that I comparing to the UK's ROI in, using AI again, randomly, this is just my thought process. Well, if NIST 8286 is a communications and integration framework, well, is it ready? what it is lack of that we as a community need to focus. So no need to read onto all of these. These are things, it's just my interpretations. But more importantly, we need to look at this. This is the result. It comes back. Insufficient operational skill. That is why we're asking all of you to help us to define that. And then from there, please look at the CIS benchmark. This is the right benchmark that your area, local or regional, and your focus in industry, what type of industry, that's it applicable. We use it heavily because it's been around for so long and it's another nonprofit organizations. And yes, there are things that it can be done within that. It's free, it's open source. This is where that we kind of boil everything together into the community objective. Close the gap, close the cyber inequity gap by having a dialogue together like this. Thank you, Award, and Marcella putting this together. This is just the starting point into how can we contribute together as a community. So I mentioned a lot about the open source, so I think that you can go look at that. This is the alpha versions that we want to, as I mentioned, that we are raising early stage funding. We need to partner with grants so we can get more grants to continue to build this open source tool. Our LinkedIn group, please let me know if you want to look at and help us to rewrite the business impact analysis, the playbook, and the workbook that is being shared as the starting point of capstone project to close these gaps. And with that, I'm going to, last 4 minutes, I'm going to give it back to Awad and Marcella. So for any quick question.
Thank you. Just really, you and I have sat on your what do you call it? Monthly meetings and your group meeting. And
yeah, the roundtable discussions. Yes.
Table discussion, but also today you brought it back down in simple language to people who are not cybersecurity experts like me. So I do thank you. And the feedback we are getting on the chat is great. Peter, you asked for to see one of the slides. Can you remember which slide? And he can, for sure, Stanley can show it back.
Sorry, Wad, it was a few back. I apologize. I was a little late on that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed it. So let me just see. Tell me when to stop.
Okay. Keep going. Keep going. Perfect. Thank you, sir. Oh, no, one down.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
And Stephen, you have been active in commenting. Scott, sorry, always I say Stephen.
Yeah. Anytime Stephen Mallory is on, I am relegated to the title of Scott. So you know, so we don't get confused, because Stephen is the only Stephen.
Okay. So, any comments on this? The presentation?
I do. Stanley, I think you and I are already connected on LinkedIn. I don't. I have followed you for some time, but I'm not quite sure how we met or when we met, if we actually did. Irrelevant for this discussion. But I'm going to do what I often do, which is to take you into a different space really quickly. And it's not a test. It's just I want to get your take on this. There's so much noise on the AI side. And I was grateful you never mentioned it, which is awesome. Or if you did, it was tangential. Like literally 70% of the webinars or seminars or anything, they're addicted to this. But I'm curious about your take on this, especially given what you're talking about. I've thought about this. Can you link this concept that you're discussing with us about cyber resilience with the artificial intelligence evolution, right? Especially this OS, right? This open source LLM model that we're dealing with, which you talked about being impactful, and its actual impact on the market from your standpoint. Can you tell me a little bit about that, your perspective?
Yeah, so I'm going to call you Scott for now. Thank you for
Fair
connecting.
enough.
Sorry if I have
Good.
not sorry if I have not, reach out to you individually, but I just need to say that that's my marketing is doing a fantastic job in reaching out to our community. But of course, I share this deck to all of you with my seller and what. So please feel out to connect me and Calendly, and I will meet you with you online to start. Now, I have to answer your question, Scott. I put a phase together probably about 15 years ago describing our IT and cybersecurity industry. We, as a technologist, are in the cycle of self-destructions when it comes to business objective. Now, to answer your question about AI, I told my marketing team, I hate to talk about AI because AI is not new. AI is full of flaws. And we all heard of, hallucinations. And now even Microsoft AI boss had talked about psychosis, the AI psychosis. And mainly to boils down and I hope that answer your questions in the context is it doesn't impact any, it doesn't according to our connective decision-making process. This is a very abstract word, but how I interpret it into, well, all these connective type of decision-making process, I cannot see what AI can produce me in front of me, so I can validate when they taking the process of calculations, whether it is actually in context of what I'm hoping for. So if it is out of context, that the result would already be a self-destruction because it doesn't accountable for what I'm looking for. This is where the human part, and like you said, thank you for that tangential type of mentioning. I talk about augmented intelligence. In fact, that we start playing with AI in 2018 with the IBM Watson. If people still remember, IBM Watson is still around, but of course it's not, being mentioned a lot in today's environment. And at that point, we already understand from a technical point of view, it's simply said garbage in, garbage out. Now, this garbage in, more importantly, now in the room of the LLM, large language model, it's being influenced by those vendor, how they train their model, which is the technical part that you already know is nothing new. Again, going back into how people's educational level comes back. Well, are we aware of this and cautiously choose not to believe it and adding our augmented intelligence, which is the reinforcement learning model, to speed up the process? Or we just going to take the easy way out, check the box, I'm going to believe what it says to me, and I'm going to be done with it.
Yeah. So
And
impact on the
that is the
market.
vicious cycle.
Can you address that part? I like the way that you're thinking. I think that that's a beautiful response, Stanley. My question is, how is it impacting the market? Is the market thinking the same way that you are?
Okay, so this is where we have to be honest with you, we have looked into ourselves deep and hard into our, deep and hard. Why is it hard? Is because we can take the easy way out. Oh, I'm going to produce an AI governance system. You know what? We're going to raise some funding immediately, right? So to speak, and not immediately, but just dramatizing it. But if we try to look at the right way to approach this is hard to explain to the investors because they don't want to learn. They just want to have a fast, tell me what the ROI is. Tell me what their KPI, what the go-to-market strategy, your cost. So the elements of this question, it's completely taken into two different tracks. And this comes back into the organization. Why we talk about producing as a customization. We let the customer to decide if that's the right things to do, hey, from the business perspective, that is the decision you made. Even though we produce this technology with AI, we give you the last fact check according to your risk tolerance level, and we only give them 2 questions to answer on our open source: likelihood and potential impact. And then the third one is revise, decline, or approve. That's it.
Yeah.
So that way, from a vendor perspective, even though if you go back into our discussions of inaction, if the management represented from the bottom up, we presented all the artifacts into them. And if they sat there, the notification already sent out, and we notified the board, the C-suite to make a decision or at least contribute comments. But if they don't do anything and then tomorrow got hacked, we have done our part. We have followed the best practice and asked them to make a decision or making comments. Now, don't come back and blame me as a vendor. It's not that, about the blame. It's about we have done our part to presenting all the evidence for them to make a decisions. And it is in a way, it's just 3 different questions that they need to answer. And if they don't do that, we have done our part.
Thank
you,
you.
Stanley. I just typed in the chat. That's a beautiful response, Stanley. Marcella,
Thank you.
I am very sorry for extending. I know that we were only scheduled to 11, but I really wanted to hear what he had to say about that. So thank you for being patient.
My pleasure. And we can connect and continue these discussions.
I would really like that, Stanley.
Sure.
Thank you. Any other comments? I see, Peter, you talked about a joke about slide 12, I think, which I like very much. So, Stanley, it's up to you to read his comment.
Yeah. So yeah, the slide that we are on, there's the old joke. Do you feel rich or do you feel lucky in dealing with these, in parentheses, cybersecurity risk? Or are you proactive and investing into governance, system services, frameworks, and insurance for these cybersecurity risks, as Stanley is generously advising? Thank you very much. I'm not advising anything. I'm just sharing my experience. But in fact, that what it makes me to embark on this sharing journey, thank you for the joke, and it is true. When I talk to the insurance underwriters, all those, the big 5 that you can name anytime, how do you underwrite that process? You know what? It's just going with the finger and testing where the wind is. And that's my joke to complement into yours, Peter. They have well, of course, that was back in 2019. But even though as 6 years had gone by, when I asked, and in fact, this is why our investment advisor said, look, you guys, we should go out and try to raise funding. And in fact, that we want to determine how do we use the Global Resilient Index at the end. And this is where that, the good and bad, lucky or being just randomly doing it, but we can use it for both. Once we have this just imagine with me on this journey, once we have this Global Resilient Index, the company, the organization themselves, and look at that breakdown based on the NIST, the CIS benchmark. Hey, we have accomplished each of the sub-control to, let's just say, 70%. This is what the industry, everybody, we're looking at 3 things: the geographic locations, what type of compliance, and the size of the organization to determine what we refer as a peer index, and looking at the sub-control level of this peer index. Now that we determine, this, based on the NIST CSF 2.0, and this is the, peer index is 70%. So in my size of the organization, 70% is good enough. But on the other hand, that the insurance company can look at that, well, because of the risk of this sub-control can be catastrophic in terms of the financial impact for themselves. they might want to say, no, you got to meet 90% or 80% in order I'm going to continue to underwrite this policy. So I just giving out the secret on why we're doing this Global Resilient Index is really now they have two sides of the coin. They can look at this index and to determine what is their priority so they can focus their costs, focus their investment into a particular area. This is part of what we refer as cost efficiency. So I hope that, joking aside, that kind of gives you the perspective. Why do we need to do that?
Thank you. Sorry, just to respect the time of others. I really appreciate everybody's contribution and participation. I know it's a subject which some people, when we talk about technology, they sort of say, it's not me, it's the IT people. But it's important to bring it into the discussion about risk management. That's all what I could comment on. Of course, Stanley, as a colleague, as a friend, thank you very much for agreeing very quickly to my request for help to be a guest speaker. Enjoyed it. Our presentation will be, it has been recorded, so it will be on our webpage, LinkedIn page, and please feel free to share it within your organization or outside your organization. As Stanley said, education, education, education. Thank you.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you, Awad. Thank you, Marcella. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Stanley. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.